There's nobody in the waiting room. So Justin, so what
question do we have to go on?
We're live.
Yep, we're good.
Live? We're
Yep.
live? Oh,
So we're out of executive session. Justin, we were talking earlier about some legislation proposed by the governor. Two things. One, sort of the cost benefit analysis. Now that we're looking at these renewable energy projects, we need part of that cost benefit analysis has to be how is that project advancing the goals for the state's renewable goals. And another one we heard was that IDAs are going to start needing to report on what they've done or their actions to advance the state's renewable energy goals. Is that anything you're aware of that you can brief us on? If not now, maybe at another date.
Yeah, the governor's budget has a few things that are interesting. And I think all generally positive. Usually we're in panic mode because there's some regulatory reform that clips our wings proposed, and we, by May, April, June, whatever, we work our way backwards and have it make sense. This one started off, I think, pretty well. The budget includes provisions that add the definition of renewable energy projects to the IDA statute. Currently, IDAs are handling solar and wind as a combination of commercial and manufacturing projects, which are both qualified purposes under our statute. They're selling energy and they're making energy. Now we have a unified definition of what a renewable energy project is, which is great. It comes with some strings that you include the consideration of not only the tax benefits, the pilot benefits, but also the contributions to the renewable energy plan throughout the state. That's easily done, so it's just another metric that you add to your cost benefit analysis and disclose when you have your public hearings. So I would view that as a positive thing, instead of kind of putting a square peg into a couple of round holes for the kind of project. We have a defined kind of project, and we have a consideration to add that bolsters your use of support for the projects, providing tax benefits to renewable energy projects, which helps the state meet its goals. So it's actually giving you more ammunition to justify the assistance. Those are all good things generally. The other thing that I'll point out is the budget includes amendments to the real property tax law that will, in essence, standardize how assessors look at renewable energy projects, in particular solar, from an assessment perspective. And I'll say that part of the struggle throughout the state with these kind of projects that continues in many areas is, how much per megawatt are you charging? And there's a whole, we could go for hours talking about, the debates and the range of, pardon me, someone just called in, so my screen went blank. Couple thousand, 2,000, 3,000 a megawatt. So some areas it's 8, 9, 10,000 megawatts. So in addition to that range of where the project should land for what it pays for a pilot, there's really no system or standard where assessors throughout the state look at these things on a level playing field. You'll see some areas where an assessor will look at the project and it ends up being assessed at something like maybe $500,000 a megawatt. And the developers look at it on a kilowatt basis, the taxes. They have a different way of looking at things in ways that they can afford it. But in some areas, you see the assessors looking at these things and saying they're $1 million or $1.5 million a megawatt assessed. So that affects what the IDA is doing to help in terms of the cost-benefit analysis. So if locally your assessor is saying one thing, your pilot and your cost-benefit analysis will just, by extension, determine what the potential savings may be. The governor's proposal comes in and says you're going to do a discount to cash basis for assessment purposes, which is going to result in, throughout the state, a unified way that assessors will look at these things, and they're going to end up being slotted with a much lower assessed value as constructed, because they're on a discounted cash basis, not the project cost or what it might sell for. This is going to have a number of dynamic effects on IDAs and generally solar projects. You're probably aware that a lot of them historically have gone to the local taxing jurisdictions and tried to negotiate direct pilots under 487, which I'm not a huge fan of because it has some trapdoors and some things that the developer can get 15 years free. creates a little bit of chaos because you have a school district negotiating, a county negotiating, and I'd like to have the IDA out front. What you're going to see if that uniform standard of assessment is adopted is the small 1 megawatt or half a megawatt or 1.5 megawatt deals are going to be assessed in a way that they might not even have to go and get a 487 pilot or even talk to you, because they can bear that net assessment and in their pro forma not have to go get these public contracts for abatement. They'll still, projects that are 4 or 5 megawatts and up are going to still want certainty though. So even though the cost benefit and the net exemption is tempered, which helps you because it doesn't look like as much of a subsidy, they're still going to want the certainty over 15 years or whatever term you agree to. So you're still going to see these projects coming at you, but largely on a larger scale, and a little bit more, less stressful. You won't have the little half megawatt things coming at you where it really doesn't make sense to do it through a full-blown IDA straight lease. So the legislation has, I think, a lot of good things in it that will help these kind of renewable projects be considered by the IDA and take a little bit of pressure off how your pilots look publicly.
Well, I'm going to jump in now. My concern is that it says in there that NYSERDA and Tax and Finance will basically come up with the model that you'll have to use. We're already using a discounted cash flow with generally accepted appraisal standards. Is NYSERDA going to come in there and manipulate what the appraisal standards are in terms of what is an income and what are costs that are associated with it? So that's my concern with that legislation. If they're using generally accepted appraisal methodologies, I don't have a problem with it, because we're already doing that now.
Right.
On a cash.
Yeah, those are valid observations, I would say. But ultimately, it doesn't necessarily directly affect you because they're NYSERDA and that advisory board or whatever they're creating is really impacting the assessment community, which has an impact on your cost benefit analysis. And everything that's on the exempt rolls by virtue of an IDA pilot still has an assessment on it.
I understand that, but my concern is, so you talk about these solar projects that have agreements at 10,000 megawatts. If they put in a new appraisal methodology and all of a sudden the full taxation is less than their pilot, what happens?
They tender or surrender, ask you to terminate the deal,
And everything, all the planning you made is out the window. So that's my concern about that, which goes back to why I think we have to really, we just had another large scale one. It's already been through NYSERDA and nobody in this county knows about it. And they got awarded a, what is it, a rec credit? Or we have two now.
Either tier 1 or rec credits, I forget which.
Whatever. So I think before we sit down with any of these any new large scale ones, we need to get a handle on what's going to be coming out of the governor's budget and out of tax and finance. So when we sit down, it may come to the point where we decide, hey, if this is the way the state wants them assessed, they should pay full taxation on their methodology. So, I just don't know where we're going to have to come until we see exactly what, not only if it gets adopted, because the same language was proposed last year, wasn't it? And then
a version of the assessment was dropped.
What's the timeline?
Also suggested in the real property tax law amendments is that a county or a school or a town can one time pass a resolution saying that we expect everyone to enter into a pilot under 487. And they never have to worry about those little magical 60-day notices of carrying and forgetting about them. So that's a positive thing.
I would agree, yeah. I always use the snowbird town supervisor analogy as why I hate it so much, because you could have someone on vacation, miss a letter, and all of a sudden you have a developer get 15 years of free taxes. It doesn't make sense from a policy perspective, and I always try to suggest or recommend that IDA directors like Dave get out there in every town and every school district. If anyone knocks on their door talking about solar, their first call should be to Dave. Please please be the central clearinghouse on pilot, and to the extent that the town has an expectation, which is reasonable, to have a decommissioning or a host community agreement, that conversation can go on at the same time. And ultimately you have an intelligent host community agreement and an intelligent pilot, and then
I tend to be against host community agreements. If there's money to the projects, it should go into the taxation bucket. What's the difference where it goes? It all goes out to the taxing jurisdiction. Do you know if there's any opinions of the state controller out there on host community agreements and whether they're considered part of the tax cap calculation?
it's a good question. There's been historical debate on extractions and how they're done properly, and if they're tied to the site plan process or a zoning approval, and they have a nexus to the impacts that the project create on a community, then it's okay for a town to enter into those kind of agreements. And to go back on your point of not loving them, we do some with them and some without. It's really a balancing act that allows the town to see a greater distribution. So for example, I know you have a couple communities that don't even have a town tax rate. They end up getting nothing under the pilot until they have a mill rate. The host community agreement at least balances what the pilot distributes and what the town as the impacted community may need or want for revenues, for fire, water, sewer protection, whatever. The use of the funds and the acceptance of them and how they hit a tax cap, they're not pilot funds. So an argument can be made that the IDA's pilot would be measured for the 2% growth factor. There's an analysis there where they may have an impact. But the host community fees, I think, are generally held outside of that as an impact fee. I know there's a couple of firms out there that are going down a weird path of getting 487 approvals out of jurisdictions like school and telling the school, hey, wait a minute, we're not going to call this a 487 pilot. It's going to be a donation agreement. Whatever the hell that is, pardon my French.
No, we have one of those.
But what if we,
And that's what's driving it. We've had it beat into our heads by another council that in some respects, as it relates to taxation, a host community agreement is unenforceable in some cases, where a pilot isn't, has an enforcement mechanism. And I believe that if we were ever to consider a host community agreement, we should memorialize that agreement in our pilot agreement. And I have a feeling that what's going to happen is the communities aren't going to say, oh, we don't want it in there, because then it's going to be considered part of the pilot and it's going to become a tax cap. I don't care what you
no,
like.
well, that's a valid concern, and I have a very short answer to that. Where I have a town entering into a contract that I'm aware of, when I'm just the IDA guy, that I'm doing the pilot, we cross default. I just say, an event of default under the pilot agreement and the leaseback agreement includes failure to make any payments or observe any covenants under host community agreement dated as of blank date with the town of wherever. That way, if they screw up and not pay the town can call us and say, they didn't pay us. And we can say, well, your pilot's gone, we're sorry. So there's enforcement mechanisms on both sides. So, and you're also avoiding the distribution concern about collecting an extra amount for the town and then having an argument where the school says, hey, wait a minute, that's a pilot payment. I get 70% of that. So let the town enforce and collect its own contract outside the pilot, and the IDA is a collaborative and friendly body to say, town, we're going to help you here. If they screw up under your contract, it's going to be an event of fault under ours too.
Justin,
We have one school that doesn't grant 487, and now all of a sudden, they're going to do one of these donations agreements, and we're going to be expected to have a manipulated, I'm afraid, we haven't seen the actual agreement yet, but they were going to make one lump sum payment for all taxes for the 15-year period of 487. Current value of all the payments, and then we're going to exempt this. They'll probably want us to exempt the school and just distribute between the town, the county, and the village. And I have no interest in getting into that type of arrangement. It's almost like they're buying the school off to give them to agree to the exemption, because the school up until that was proposed was dead set against it. So.
But I'll bet you a beer I know who the council is pitching that. So.
Yeah. Justin, what's the timeline?
Buffalo?
Yes, sir, yes, sir.
Okay,
Justin, what's the timeline on the governor's new proposal regarding that taxation?
But it's tied to the budget, so if they hit April 1, they'll all look like euros, and then we have April 1, with an effective date that's either as of budget, or usually they throw out 60 days of a ramp-up period for compliance. So we'll have to take a look at how the final budget is drafted and see if they put in any effective clauses that delay when it starts up. But I would suspect if they have a timely budget adopted in April, we'd be looking at May, June for this kind of thing. It's really just new stuff for the IDA to look at, helps you justify the projects.
Thank you.
we have time to talk about, it's really not a Justin thing, US Light and Energy in Philadelphia and the email we got last night.
I was gonna ask for that to be put in the loan review packet next week. That's where it belongs.
Okay. My personal opinion is I have no problems doing a 1 year. These guys have proven that they are clueless on how to do this. They've known about this issue for months, and now here we are 2 weeks away from the end of, until taxable status date. And all of a sudden, they ignored our advice, what, 2 weeks ago?
We gave them a deadline of the 5th to put it in front of loan review, so, well, the meeting was postponed, but
My
nevertheless.
perspective, I would charge them a lump sum fee of $5,000, do a 1 year pilot at $3,500, and give them the next year.
They're willing to pay they're willing to pay a 1% fee of 13 million. They're willing to pay us 130K.
No, that's for the whole, they're looking for, that's for the whole pilot agreement.
Like,
Again, this is a negotiation. That's their starting offer. We'll go back with whatever the hell we want.
I'm not interested in 2 weeks putting together a 15-year pilot.
No, I mean, and there's no sense in deviating from our standard UTEP. If it's 5,500 a megawatt, I would go for not inverting it, 5,500 a megawatt 1 year, and come up with what they need to pay us up front. But it probably is in the range of 1%. By the time we get staff time, expediting, lawyers, everything else, I think cutting our fee in half is not a terrible position to end at. Maybe
For a 1 year pilot?
What's it?
For a 1 year pilot?
Yeah,
That's 130 grand, isn't it?
we're expensive. We're all volunteers, man. Our hourly rate is huge.
What's what's their full tax exposure? I mean, that's what you're playing with. So I mean, do they, is it,
I think they're paying, did it say 430,000 assessment?
No, I talked to the assessor and urged him, once I knew they were past the deadline, to negotiate an assessment with them so they don't get dragged into litigation. You know, do a 1 year agreement so they could get a pilot in place in year 2. But that must not have worked out.
Well, it sounds from the email like they're not sure they can get the school to go through that process in time. You read the email from that.
is the project
If
taxable?
I look at their application,
The project is probably 90% constructed, Justin.
Okay, so they're facing a partial at a minimum. Is the assessor hawkish, or is he gonna wait till it's in service to hit it with a full assessment?
Knowing the assessor from working with him, he's clueless, but he has a history of going high.
Okay. So if they're gonna travel over March 1, not complete, no in-service date, they might not hit that assessment, or an adjustment on the rolls from zero value to built. And that would occur March 1 of 2022. So there may, the fact that the rolls are forward-looking, if we close an IDA pilot today, it doesn't go to the assessor to March 1 in a March 1 community. And then that doesn't affect the actual taxes on a project until, most often, if it's town and county, January of 22. And if we have a good flow of operations with a school district, then their July 1 tax lien date, if we file by March 1 of this year, we will control taxes starting this summer that run for the school district year 2021 to 2022. So it's all forward looking. There might not be as much of a, oh shit, thing going on right now with March 1 being, less than 3 weeks away, right?
Yeah, so maybe the suggestion is that they delay going into service until after March 1.
Well, the fact that they're not in service doesn't change that there's added value to that property.
That's why I asked if the assessor is gonna see a partial. Sometimes you'll have very hawkish assessors and they'll have even in like on a residential basis, if you have a half-built house in a subdivision, they'll go clip it sometimes if the half-built status, but.
When you're in a market value scenario, which all of New York State is the market value different with that partially built? Yes, it is.
Yeah.
The question is, what is that value? Now, if it's 50% built, it's not 50% of cost, that's for sure. But,
Right.
you know, if he put a reasonable, value on it, just think of the land value. They're now paying probably $750 to $1,000 an acre. That land has new value just to the underlying landowner because of, the income stream.
Yeah, fish solar as well, if it involves historically ag land, that gets converted, and there's actually penalties sometimes you have to pay in an ag district.
This wasn't in an ag district. We have one that all the parcels are in an ag district, but this is.
Okay. There's also a nuance there, even if he clips it for like a 50% assessed amount,
Excuse
midstream.
me, one board.
Yeah, the IDA coming in later with a pilot could create a situation where they pay X at a certain level, back it. From a policy perspective, you have to look.
Go on.
Dave,
Yeah.
You gotta jump off.
put this on, long review, or, I'm fine with moving it to the full board, and we'll have to push it in the meeting of the 18th to agree we're gonna do something or not.
Or maybe we suggest to our council, they look at, you know, if the town's supportive, that they do something that they're modest in the assessment for the next year, each time.
And Lyle, you said we've already collected and retained the $10,000 application fee?
That's correct.
All right, so we're 10,000 to the good. Just spent that on this discussion. What we kind of said in loan review was maybe we consider a no more fee, just an à la carte situation. They just basically pay for real cost. So if Justin has to put 10 hours into it, we just kind of get reimbursed our actual cost and collect a pilot fee. It's a 1-year placeholder. That was kind of what we discussed in loan review, is rather than trying to crash the fee was too high or too low, let's just make it just right.
That might make a lot of sense, especially if the governor's new taxation proposal is gonna roll out in 60 days, you know.
And you know, we still have to discuss it at the full board, about what we want to do. This is not a deviation, it's basically a 1-year pilot under our UTAP, so as long as we don't change the value per megawatt, just how we collect our fee part is really I think we have great latitude within the agency on how we do that, because if we get paid a la carte, nobody can complain when we get audited about this special circumstance and we did something wrong.
I wouldn't want to drop to the 3,500 they requested. I'd say we stay at our 5,500.
That's a deviation. If they want to have it as a deviation, we can let this thing go for a year. 55. So my opinion and what I was going to bring up at loan review is I would not invert it. So like normally we start out at what, 8,200 in year one. I would keep it at 5,500, 1-year agreement. You're done after a year. If you want to renegotiate the pilot, send in new applications. We'll come up with value.
Yep.
I can support that.
All right, we talked about,
Okay.
all right,
Goal here to close by March 1st for that? That's damn near impossible, I would think.
I think it is now. Originally, we thought they'd let us know the first week in February, and we would do a special meeting and public hearing.
February was around that date.
Yeah.
We got notified on the 10th of February at
Yeah.
9 p.m.
Yeah. I don't know much about the project, but if there's over 100 grand in assistance, probably is, gotta have a hearing. It takes a few weeks just to get caught up with the company council on title stuff to get a lease back in place, so.
Actually, how many megawatts is this? 8 megawatts total, I
I
forget.
think it's 8, yes.
It's four very small projects.
4 twos.
Okay, so 8 megawatts total times 5,500, so we're talking $50,000.
Now, you look at what 8 megawatts would be assessed at,
Okay,
potentially.
so you're looking at all the way around.
Yeah, $8 million exempted to pay, 8 megawatts at 5,500 is, 40 grand. So you're looking between mill rates and 40 grand, so I think you're looking at a pretty big.
Beyond the, so we're beyond, I thought you meant about how much we're actually abating when you said assistance.
Oh, God, yeah, well, the trigger's 100 grand in assistance to have a hearing. Running a tight schedule now just to get a hearing scheduled and held, out in that town, at a time that makes sense prior to your final approval, which, between here and there, you got, 17 days. So I don't know that it's, I think the biggest question perhaps to suss out is go talk to the assessor and say, hey, are you gonna bump up their assessment midstream? And if so, maybe there's a rescue mission here, but if not, you got lots of time. You can deal with this, until next March 1st.
Okay. Okay. I think we've had enough.
Yeah,
Thanks, Justin. Can I get a motion to adjourn?
it was great talking to you folks.
You too, Justin, thanks.
Thank you.
I make a motion to adjourn.
Oh, did somebody make a motion? or-
Yeah, Ed's there, you second. All in favor, aye.
Aye.
We stand adjourned. Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Justin.
Well, Paul didn't hear it, you wanted to discuss that one later, but it was still a discussion. That may be the answer though, just getting the acceptance they need that first year.
Yeah.
We got to
Push it, yep, push it sideways, take a lump sum.